For decades, Africa was told it could never rise without the West. But then a nation built its own aircraft, without foreign engineers, without permission. What followed wasn't just innovation. It was a direct threat to every Western institution built on African dependence. Because this wasn't just one country rising, it was a continent refusing to kneel. And for the first time, Black Americans and Black communities across the globe are watching with pride as Pan-African power takes flight. No external intervention, no Western schematics, no subcontracted systems. In an era when even global powers are pouring billions into defense procurement and still outsourcing jet components, how did this modest West African nation pull it off? And why is the West growing increasingly uneasy? Now let us unveil the truth they never wanted you to see. At the outset, everyone was skeptical. Chatter had been spreading for days around Ouagadougou. Murmurs that a collective of Burkina Bay innovators, laboring discreetly and away from media glare, had crafted something unprecedented. But even those who caught wind of it didn't fully accept it. After all, how could a landlocked territory in the Sahel, more associated with post-colonial resistance than aerospace engineering, actually assemble a working aircraft from the ground up? Then came the revelation. No declaration from Paris, no endorsement from Brussels, no World Bank-sponsored unveiling. Just a multitude, learners, peasants, mechanics, elders, all converging to witness something that disrupted the old economic order. When the hangar doors slid open, unveiling the sleek metallic shell of the aircraft, the air went still. No gasps, no ovation, just stillness. The type that descends when a dream becomes tangible. This wasn't just a flying machine. It was a rejection of systemic extraction. It was a message to the global tech industry, to the decentralized finance crowd, to those watching Africa through the lens of venture capital and patents innovation does not require imperial permission. Validation doesn't need colonial certification. The aircraft proved that Africa isn't asking to join the race. It's creating its own runway, and this wasn't some ceremonial prototype. It moved. It ascended. It glided. And along with it, so did something long suppressed the African imagination. Not because brilliance was absent, but because for decades, brilliance was leased to foreign logos and global supply chains. From childhood, gifted minds were nudged toward international success, too often code for external dependence. A Burkina Bay intellect might engineer the part, but it would carry a Swiss patent. A Malian expert might perfect the propulsion, but the royalties would land in Dubai. This aircraft reversed that. It redefined who holds the sovereign right to invent, to manufacture, to claim generational wealth through local production and intellectual property. And as onlookers tracked the aircraft's ascent over Ouagadougou, something deeper began to settle. This moment wasn't improvised. It wasn't merely about engineering. It was about an insurgent model of digital entrepreneurship and sovereign infrastructure. For decades, African states outsourced power, health emergency, called WHO national security, bring in Pentagon advisors, development finance, depend on the Bretton Woods system. But Traoré flipped the entire script. He didn't ask what could be shipped in. He asked what could be built, owned, and scaled from within. Stay with us, because what follows might completely shift how you view African innovation. And when that inquiry finally transformed into policy, not just rhetoric or motto, this aircraft emerged. Traoré's leadership had been quietly redirecting national budgets into sovereign innovation. He funded vocational institutes, resourced local components, and rejected development loans tied to foreign policy strings. Most critically, he told his people innovation doesn't require permission. That message wasn't symbolic, it was strategic. The aircraft's very existence was born from this recalibration. It didn't depend on venture capital from Silicon Valley. It demanded belief, the kind of belief systematically drained from African nations. Not by chance, but by design. And this is what gave the unveiling its true weight. Not because it turned Burkina Faso into an aerospace hub overnight, but because it shattered something sacred to Western economic dominance, the myth that Africa must eternally play catch-up. This wasn't defiance. It wasn't armed rebellion. It was something far more unsettling to Western orthodoxy: autonomous aviation built without Bretton Woods oversight. And for something so elegant, so domestically engineered, so clean, it evoked a storm. Because once the jet touched down, global attention didn't drift toward celebration. It snapped toward control. Not from African eyes. Those were already burning with ancestral pride. It was Western eyes, accustomed to managing African capability from a distance. Now those gazes were locked in, not in awe, but in unease. So the question could no longer be shelved: why are Western regimes suddenly in a state of alert over one aircraft from Burkina Faso? When the landing gear struck the soil and the dust began to settle, tremors weren't just felt in Ouagadougou. They reverberated in policy rooms from DC to Paris, from Ottawa to Berlin. Not because of the machine itself, but because of the disruption it represented, a tear in the firewall of controlled innovation. A threat to monopoly over intellectual property, aerospace patents, digital infrastructure, and scientific sovereignty. Western control never solely relied on coercion. It thrived on leverage over capital flows, cybersecurity licenses, insurance treaties, and manufacturing chains. The tools of progress have always arrived laced with obligations. Want assistance? Accept the trade pact. Need training? Welcome our technical advisors. Need e-commerce investment? Surrender your data pipelines. Then comes Burkina Faso, without legacy aviation firms, without billion-dollar funding rounds, without IMF facilitation, pulling off the most unthinkable act in the global digital economy, innovating without external sign-off. That's what set off the alarms. This aircraft wasn't just an industrial disruption. It was a blow to the West's longest standing psychological leverage. The notion that Africa can't advance without its guardianship. The backlash wasn't loud, but it was immediate. US analysts requested classified breakdowns. European defense lobbies sought to vet its specs. A handful of American contractors began drafting strategic partnerships under the guise of expanding production. But it wasn't curiosity. It was quiet containment. Soft sabotage dressed as diplomacy. Because here's the part Western regimes won't admit openly: this aircraft was never just a machine. It was a declaration. It announced a governance doctrine no longer reliant on foreign templates. One that doesn't appeal for access, but architects new paradigms of economic independence. If you thought that aircraft rattled the system, wait until you see what's powering it next. In reality, this wasn't the first time such disruption had occurred. Recall Libya under Muammar Gaddafi, when he launched a Pan-African satellite initiative to free the continent from Europe's predatory telecom fees. The Western powers panicked, not because lives were at stake, but because their influence was. That same panic has returned. Why? Because this aircraft symbolizes something even more dangerous than isolated sovereignty. It hints at a regional cascade. If Burkina Faso could achieve this, what's to stop Mali, Niger, or Chad from replicating the feat? What happens when African nations begin investing in native innovation? Not just in agriculture or textiles, but in aviation, electronics, cyber infrastructure, and renewable energy. The architecture of dependency, carefully programmed through aid packages, development loans, and licensing regimes, starts to crack. And there's a deeper concern Western intelligence won't publicly acknowledge, but quietly obsesses over: strategic imbalance. A homegrown aircraft isn't just a civil aviation breakthrough. It's a launchpad for defense capability, for aerial surveillance, for sovereign airspace control. In regions where Western powers have historically relied on destabilization to justify their military presence, that kind of capability is a geopolitical nightmare. So yes, their concern isn't about the aeronautics. It's about what autonomy in aviation represents: the dissolution of their regional leverage. The closer they look, the more their contradictions surface. These are the same governments that promote the slogan, "African solutions for African challenges." But when an African nation finally produces a solution, there's no applause, only suspicion. Their discomfort is more than tactical, it's existential. Because if a landlocked, resource-constrained nation like Burkina Faso, dismissed for decades as geopolitically irrelevant, can build what even some G20 nations have failed to indigenize, then every Western doctrine on Africa must be rewritten. That's not just inconvenient. That's destabilizing to an entire worldview. One where Africa was meant to follow, not lead. So where does that leave us? Quick reminder, like the video, share it widely, and subscribe for more from Black Rebellion, Black Existence, Black Untold History. Because this story doesn't stop here. Let's keep going. Right now, there's only one way left to stop this wave. And the West knows it well. It's the oldest play in the neocolonial book, divide and dilute, minimize the accomplishment, cast doubt, whisper theories, float cooperative, offers that come wired to IP theft. Already, the rumors are in motion. Surely, they claim Russia must be behind it. Or maybe China smuggled in the tech. Anything to avoid confronting the obvious that this innovation was made in Africa, by Africans, for African futures. That the genius is local. That the blueprint wasn't emailed from Brussels, but drawn in Ouagadougou. Yet here's where Western analysts are miscalculating. The grip is slipping. Their old frameworks no longer apply. And now, attention is shifting, not to the usual partners offering joint ventures with hidden clauses, but to a new bloc. One offering raw materials, logistics, and manufacturing help, without political strings, without licensing traps, without debt servitude. As the Western think tanks scrambled to decode what Burkina Faso had just executed, one question kept echoing in their confidential memos. How? How can a nation with no aerospace legacy, no aviation conglomerates, and no formal training pipelines suddenly produce a high-caliber aircraft and keep it hidden until it touched the skies? In Western policy circles, the conclusion wasn't drawn from evidence. It was drawn from arrogance. They must have had help. But maybe they did, just not the kind the West assumes. This aircraft, though designed and built by Burkinabe engineers, didn't materialize in a vacuum. It was the product of a quiet but rising wave of strategic realignments. Coalitions not declared in headlines, but born from common frustrations, shared exclusions, and a single, silent ambition to dismantle Western monopoly over power, innovation, and intellectual sovereignty. At the core of this emerging ecosystem are three names that send unease through every Western embassy cable: Russia, China, and North Korea. None have openly claimed involvement. Burkina Faso hasn't disclosed specifics, but trace the contours of recent activity and a pattern becomes unmistakable. Russia surged into the Sahel after France's retreat, offering training, weapons, and infrastructure support without conditionality, without colonial tone. China has pivoted from highways and stadiums to digital systems, cloud infrastructure, and data sovereignty, encouraging African states to mirror innovation models forged in Beijing. North Korea, though veiled in secrecy, has a niche tradition, exporting aeronautical knowledge to marginalized nations building their own engineering backbones. What unites these powers? Each has been cornered by Western sanctions. Each has endured isolation, embargoes, and narrative warfare. And now, in Africa, they've found not resistance, but receptivity. Burkina Faso isn't forming any formal bloc. This isn't Cold War 2.0. There are no speeches, no treaties, no choreographed military parades. This is subtler. It's about strategic partnerships, not ideological pledges. It's about aligning intent and sharing tools, without requesting permission from Paris, London, or Washington. And that subtlety is what makes it so effective. Because this isn't merely geopolitical maneuvering. It strikes something deeper. Psychological reclamation. When Russia offers defense systems without reform demands, when China installs cloud platforms without moral conditions, when North Korean engineers quietly pass along industrial compartmentalization tactics, they're not just aiding, they're recognizing, respecting, elevating. After generations of dictates, invasions masked as development, and forced policy reforms labeled as support. African leaders are beginning to ask a forbidden question. Why shouldn't we work with those who treat us as peers rather than pawns? What's happening in Burkina Faso transcends the steel and circuitry of a single aircraft. It heralds a new doctrine of progress. One that swaps dependency for precision diplomacy, that trades foreign tutelage for tech transfer without interference. And here's the irony: the West wasn't prepared. Their machinery is designed to crush rebellions, not respond to non-aligned innovation. They know this jet isn't the final chapter. It's the first, and more are coming, not just machines but models. Not just engines, but ideologies. This was never about a plane. It's about what the plane unleashes, a new wave of African initiative, unshackled from the colonial script. The jet that soared over Ouagadougou wasn't just powered by fuel. It was powered by something far more dangerous to the old order: agency. Moscow, Beijing, Pyongyang, they're not offering shackles. They're offering instruments. And for a continent brimming with suppressed brilliance and generational drive, that's all it ever truly needed: tools, not masters. This moment doesn't just challenge foreign engagement. It redefines it. In the past, that term meant occupation, extraction, or covert orchestration under the guise of aid or partnership. But today's emerging blueprint is anchored in a new logic. It doesn't aim to replace African capacity. It aims to unleash it. That's why Burkina Faso didn't import foreign engineers to steer the operation. What they pursued were digital frameworks, advanced composite materials, and training methodologies. The blueprint, the execution, and the resolve came from within. And that simple fact frightens Western institutions more than any missile or tank brigade ever could. Because when self-governed leadership aligns with non-Western partners who don't force ideological conversions, what emerges is something the colonial playbook cannot contain: unorthodox, ungovernable, and irreversible momentum. But it doesn't stop at Burkina Faso. The ripple effect is already spreading. If this quiet coalition, rooted in shared exclusion and hardened resilience, extends its reach across Mali, Niger, Guinea, Ethiopia, and beyond, the continent won't just be reacting to global forces. It will become one, not as a pawn, but as a pole, a geopolitical pillar with its own rules, voice, and gravity. And that forces the West to confront an overdue reckoning. If African states are acquiring both the mechanical competence and strategic boldness to script their own futures, then what kind of Africa is on the horizon? When authority shifts, it doesn't send press releases. It arrives quietly, steadily, methodically. But in Burkina Faso, it didn't arrive quietly. It erupted loudly, publicly, symbolically, in full view of thousands. And for those paying close attention, it confirmed what had been building silently beneath the Sahel for years. Africa is no longer waiting. This isn't about one aircraft. This isn't just aviation or diplomacy. This is the genesis of a different Africa, one that no longer hinges its identity on Western praise, nor delays its ambitions for outside validation. This is an Africa driven by clarity, by confidence, and most threatening to the old global order, by intention. For decades, Western strategists sustained a carefully managed image of Africa, kept alive through debt cycles, dependency, and perpetual branding as emerging. But that was never about total domination. It was about calibration, keeping Africa productive enough to fuel Western economies, but not sovereign enough to challenge them. That calibration is collapsing. The rise of self-ruling African states, led by determined actors like Traoré, isn't about fine-tuning the old equation. It's about breaking it. They're not asking, how do we mirror Western models? They're asking, how do we invent our own, with our truths, and on our terms? Burkina Faso's aircraft is one visible answer. But it's not the only one. In Guinea, a silent reclamation is underway. Leaders are asserting mineral sovereignty, renegotiating contracts, pushing out exploitative conglomerates, and placing citizen welfare over corporate control. In Mali, both digital ecosystems and defense structures are being rebuilt from the ground up. Not as relics of French command, but as blueprints of indigenous authority. In Ethiopia, monumental hydropower initiatives like the Grand Renaissance Dam are proving a simple yet seismic truth. Modern sovereignty doesn't require Western authorization slips. In Tanzania, the rise of domestic vaccine innovation hubs is minimizing dependency on foreign medical cartels. These are not isolated advancements. They are coordinated pulses of a wider shift, redefining what scientific credibility looks like. And at the core lies a deeper ignition. For the first time in living memory, multiple African states are embracing a radical yet lucid realization: the West is not a prerequisite for ascent. And once that idea spreads, the very scaffolding of foreign dependence begins to collapse. The tremors are already reaching Western think tanks. Their language has changed. They no longer speak of helping Africa grow. They now warn of losing African leverage. It's a subtle shift, but a deeply revealing one. This new language reflects a deeper loss agency migration. Even more powerful than geopolitics is the transformation in Africa's youth. For generations, ambition was outsourced. Young minds were trained to equate progress with relocation, to London, to Paris, to New York. But now, the compass is rotating. The dreams are shifting to Ouagadougou, Bamako, Addis Ababa, because what's blooming isn't just infrastructure, it's belief. This is the heart of the new Africa, not only in factories or labs, but in intellectual sovereignty, and its rhythm is pan-African. Traoré's insistence on embedding the aircraft's development within the continent wasn't mere symbolism. It was strategy. He understood that a single country's rise can be quarantined. But a continental surge, that's immune. That's when protection becomes policy, trade becomes resilience, and progress becomes irreversible. Of course, there are battles, embargoes, propaganda, economic sabotage, the usual weapons. Western media outlets have gone into overdrive, portraying these leaders as volatile, unhinged, or dictatorial. But these narratives are unraveling fast, because ordinary Africans are witnessing something else. Not theories, not summits, but evidence machines switching on, currencies stabilizing, sovereign zones being defended. Burkina Faso's aircraft wasn't just an object. It was a mirror, reflecting the full range of what's possible when African states abandon permission and start building ecosystems. And that is the West's final fear, not merely that Africa rises, but that it rises together. Imagine this: Nigeria designs processors. Ethiopia energizes them. Burkina Faso transports them on home-built fleets. That's not just independence. That's interdependence on African terms. And for those invested in a fractured Africa, this is the nightmare scenario. Because when competition becomes cooperation and isolation becomes synergy, the world encounters something entirely new. Not a copy of Europe, not a silhouette of Asia, not an echo of America, but something raw, sovereign, and fully African. Now, the final question is yours. Do you believe this momentum can be stopped? Will the West try to sabotage it again? How steep is the path toward African unity? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. If you want more videos like this, subscribe now and tap the bell icon so you never miss what comes next. Here at Black Rebellion, we've pledged to expose what others conceal. Black Rebellion. Black existence. Black untold history. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay awake.